Ntd Sverige visar här dokumentären Infiltration i väst, del 9 i specialserien Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. I detta avsnitt tar vi upp de västerländska ungdomarnas revolution under 60-talet och om den person som avfärdade deras naivitet, uppriktighet och idealism. Mannen var Saul Alinsky, en radikal aktivist som skrev böcker, undervisade studenter och personligen övervakade hur hans teorier omsattes i praktik. Alinsky sa, om den verkliga radikalen märker att långt hår utgör ett psykologiskt hinder för kommunikation och organisation, så klipper han håret. Så småningom blev Alinsky den para-kommunistiska agitatorn, vars inflytande var det mest skadliga under flera årtionden. Förutom sin dyrkan av Lenin och Castro hyllade Alinsky även uttryckligen djävulen själv.
Six, the new Marxists who worship Satan. When the street revolution of Western youths was in full swing in the 1960s, there was one who dismissed their naivety, sincerity, and idealism. Quote, if the real radical finds that having long hair sets up psychological barriers to communication and organization, he cuts his hair, he said. The man was Saul Alinsky, a radical activist who wrote books, taught students, and personally oversaw the implementation of his theories, eventually becoming the para-communist agitator with the most menacing influence for decades. Aside from his worship of Lenin and Castro, Alinsky also explicitly praised the devil himself. In his book, Rules for Radicals, one of the epigraphs says, quote, lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement of the very first radical, from all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which, the first radical known to man, who rebelled against the establishment, and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. The reason Alinsky is best termed a para-communist is that, unlike the old left, political leftists, of the 1930s, and the new left, cultural leftists, of the 1960s, Alinsky refused to affirmatively describe his political ideals. His overall view was that the world has the haves, the have-a-little-want-mores, and the have-nots. He called upon the have-nots to rebel against the haves by any means and to seize wealth and power in order to achieve a completely, quote, equal society. He sought to seize power through any means, while at the same time destroying the existing social system. He has been called the Lenin of the post-communist left and its Sun Tzu. In Rules for Radicals, published in 1971, Alinsky systematically set forth his theory and methods of community organizing. These rules include, quote, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag, keep the pressure on, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself, ridicule is man's most potent weapon, and pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. The essence of his rules was about using immoral means to achieve his goals and gain power. The nature of Alinsky's seemingly dry rules for community organization becomes clear when they are applied in the real world. When the Vietnam War was still in progress in 1972, George H.W. Bush, then U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, gave a speech at Tulane University. Students at the university who were against the war sought advice from Alinsky, who said that protesting with the usual methods would likely result simply in them being expelled. He thus suggested that they don Ku Klux Klan garb, and whenever Bush defended the Vietnam War, they'd stand up with placards and say, quote, the KKK supports Bush. The students did so with very successful, attention-getting results. Alinsky and his followers were delighted with two other protests he planned. In 1964, in negotiations with Chicago city authorities, Alinsky concocted the plan of organizing 2,500 activists to occupy the toilets in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, to force its operations to grind to a halt. Prior to actually carrying off the plan, he leaked the plan, thus forcing the authorities to negotiate. In order to force Kodak, the major employer in Rochester, New York, to increase the ratio of black employees to white, Alinsky came up with a similar tactic, seizing on an important cultural tradition in the city. An upcoming performance of the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, Alinsky planned to purchase hundreds of tickets for his activists and feed them baked beans beforehand, so they could fill the theater and ruin the performance with flatulence. This episode didn't come to fruition, but the threat of it, as well as Alinsky's other tactics, enhanced his position in negotiations. Alinsky's book leaves the impression of a sinister, cold, and calculating individual. His use of community organizing was really a form of gradual revolution. The differences between Alinsky and his forerunners were several. First, both old and new leftists were at least idealistic in their rhetoric, while Alinsky stripped revolution of its idealistic veneer and exposed it as a naked power struggle. When he conducted training for community organizations, he would routinely ask the trainees, "Why organize?" Some would say that it was to help others, but Alinsky would roar back, "You want to organize for power." In the training manual that Alinsky followers went by, it said, quote, "We are not virtuous by not wanting power. We are really cowards for not wanting power." And, quote, "Power is good. Powerlessness is evil." Second, Alinsky didn't think much of the rebellious youth of the 60s who were publicly against government and society. He stressed that whenever possible, one should enter the system while biding time for opportunities to subvert it from within. Third, Alinsky's ultimate goal was to subvert and destroy, not to benefit any group. Thus, in implementing his plan, it was necessary to conceal the real purpose with localized or staged goals that were seemingly reasonable or harmless by themselves, to mobilize large crowds to action. When people were accustomed to being mobilized, it was relatively easy to mobilize them to act toward more radical goals. In Rules for Radicals, Alinsky said, "Any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. Remember, once you organize people around something that's commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution." A leader from Students for a Democratic Society, who was deeply influenced by Alinsky, nailed the essence of radicalizing protests. Quote, "The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution." The radical left after the 60s was deeply influenced by Alinsky and always turned the response to any social issue into dissatisfaction with the status quo overall, as a stepping stone for advancing the revolutionary cause. Fourth, Alinsky turned politics into a guerrilla war without restraint. In explaining his strategy for community organizing, Alinsky told his followers that they need to hit the enemy's eyes, ears, and nose. As he writes in Rules for Radicals, quote, "First the eyes. If you have organized a vast, mass-based people's organization, you can parade it visibly before the enemy and openly show your power. Second, the ears. If your organization is small in numbers, then do what Gideon did. Conceal the members in the dark, but raise a din and clamor that will make the listener believe that your organization numbers many more than it does. Third, the nose. If your organization is too tiny even for noise, stink up the place." Fifth, from his actions in politics, Alinsky emphasized using the most evil aspects of human nature, including laziness, greed, envy, and hatred. Sometimes participants in his campaigns would win petty gains, but this only made them more cynical and shameless. In order to subvert the political system and social order of free countries, Alinsky was happy to lead his followers to moral bankruptcy. From this, it can be inferred that if he were to truly gain power, he would neither take care of nor pity his former comrades. Decades later, two prominent figures in American politics who were deeply influenced by Alinsky helped to usher in the silent revolution that has subverted American civilization, traditions, and values. At the same time, the no-holds-barred, unrestricted guerrilla warfare type protests advocated by Alinsky became popular in America from the 1970s on. This is clear through the, quote, "Vomit In" protest in 1999 against the World Trade Organization in Seattle, where protesters ingested a drug that induced vomiting. then collectively vomited in the plaza and conference center. The Occupy Wall Street movement, the Antifa movement, and so on. It's important to note that in one of the introductory pages for Rules for Radicals, Alinsky gave his, quote, acknowledgement to the very first radical, Lucifer. Further, in an interview with Playboy magazine shortly before his death, Alinsky said that when he died, he would, quote, unreservedly choose to go to hell and begin to organize the proletariat there because, quote, they're my kind of people. Seven, the left's long march through the institutions. It was Antonio Gramsci, a prominent Italian communist, who promoted the idea of carrying out, quote, the long march through the institutions. He found that it's difficult to incite people with faith to initiate a revolution to overthrow a legitimate government, and so in order to bring about a revolution, communists rely on a large number of foot soldiers who share their dark vision of morality, faith, and traditions. The revolution of the proletariat, then, must begin with the subversion of religion, morality, and civilization. After the failure of the street revolutions in the 1960s, the rebels began entering academia. They obtained degrees, became scholars, professors, government officials, and journalists, and entered the mainstream of society to carry out the long march through the institutions. Thus, they infiltrated and corrupted the institutions that are crucial for the maintenance of the morality of Western society. This includes the church, the government, the education system, the legislative and judicial bodies, the art world, the media, and NGOs. The United States, since the 1960s, has been like a patient with an affliction who cannot identify the cause. Para-Marxist ideas have seeped deep into American society and have been metastasizing. Among the many revolutionary theories and strategies that have been put forward, the Cloward-Piven strategy, proposed by two sociologists from Columbia University, became among the most well-known, and it has been tested with some degree of success. The core concept of the strategy is to use the public welfare system to force the government to collapse. According to U.S. government policy, the number of people eligible for welfare benefits is far greater than the number of people actually receiving benefits. As long as these people are encouraged or organized to take benefits, they will soon use up the government's funds, ensuring that the government will be unable to make ends meet. The National Welfare Rights Organization is behind the implementation of this strategy. According to statistics, from 1965 to 1974, the number of single-parent families receiving benefits surged from 4.3 million to 10.8 million, more than doubling. In 1970, 28% of the annual budget of New York City was spent on welfare expenses. On average, of every two people who worked, one person received benefits. From 1960 to 1970, the number of people receiving benefits in New York City rose from 200,000 to 1.1 million. In 1975, New York City was almost bankrupt. The Cloward-Piven strategy is intended to create a crisis. It thus can be regarded as another implementation of Alinsky's theories, one of which is to, quote, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. Since the Bolshevik Revolution led by Lenin, the Communist Party has been good at intrigue and scheming. With a very small number of people, it created powerful revolutions and crises that could then be taken advantage of. Similar things happen in American politics. For example, some of the left's ideas in the United States are so radical that they seem incomprehensible to most people. Why, for instance, do lawmakers and elected officials seem to represent only the voice of extreme minorities, such as transgender people, but ignore the important issues of livelihood of the majority? The answer is simple. They are not representing the real public opinion. Lenin once said that labor unions are, quote, the transmission belts from the Communist Party to the masses. The communists found that as long as they control the labor unions, they control a large number of votes. As long as they control the votes, They can make elected officials and lawmakers do their bidding. Therefore, communists seek to gain control of labor unions, thereby controlling a large number of parliamentarians and elected officials to turn the communists' subversive political program into that of left-wing politics. W. Cleon Skousen wrote in his book, The Naked Communist, that one of the communists' 45 goals is to, quote, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Communists and those who ignorantly act on their behalf try to subvert the political and social system of free societies in any way they can. After decades of communist planning and operations, the governments and societies of the United States and other Western countries have been severely eroded as communist thinking and elements have entered the U.S. body politic.
President Trump facilitating the signing of a peace deal between the Congo and Rwanda, as well as agreements on critical minerals and national security, and the president honoring West Virginia National Guard Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, while the administration tightens the policy on work permits for immigrants. Our Washington correspondent Mario Tzu has more from the North Lawn of the White House.
Today we commit to stopping decades of violence and bloodshed and to begin a new era of harmony and cooperation between the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
President Trump hosting the leaders of the Congo and Rwanda here in Washington to sign what they're calling the Washington Accords.
For more than 30 years, one of the worst conflicts on earth has been raging in eastern Congo. Millions and millions of people have been tragically killed. There are many administrations have tried, and today we're succeeding where so many others have failed.
These accords formalize the terms of an agreement made between the two countries back in June. The terms include a permanent ceasefire, disarmament of non-state forces, provisions for refugees to return to their homes, and justice and accountability for everyone who committed illegal acts. The agreement also includes critical mineral deals with the two countries.
And we'll be involved with sending some of our biggest and greatest companies over to the two countries, and we're going to take out some of the rare earth and take out some of the assets and pay, and everybody's going to make a lot of money.
As Washington looks for ways to circumvent China to acquire rare earths, with President Trump recently signing a flurry of rare earths deals with other nations in efforts to curb U.S. dependence on China. Meanwhile, President Trump is ordering all flags to fly at half-staff today in honor of West Virginia National Guard Sarah Beckstrom. Beckstrom was only 20 years old when she was shot and killed by an Afghan national on Thanksgiving Eve, just blocks away from the White House. Since then, President Trump has vowed to permanently pause what he calls migration from all third world countries and tighten work permits for migrants.
This heinous atrocity reminds us that we have no greater national security priority than ensuring that we have full control over the people that enter and remain in our country. For the most part, we don't want them.
The president criticizes the Biden-era program called Operation Allies Welcome, which provided entry to Afghan nationals after the U.S.'s 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal, saying that the shooting suspect was, quote, one of those flown in by the Biden administration.
We are conducting thorough scrutiny, security screening. Once screened and cleared, we will welcome these Afghans who helped us in the war effort over the last 20 years to their new home in the United States of America. Because that's who we are. That's what America is.
This is what it looked like when they came in. It was total bedlam. Do you remember that period of time? Total bedlam. People crammed onto the plane, and the toughest, meanest, most capable physically got on the plane, not the people that we were looking for or that they wanted to bring in.
Reporting from the White House, Mario Tzu, Ntd News.
The Trump administration is moving to designate certain chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organizations. President Trump signed an executive order today.
Det muslimska brödraskapet grundades i Egypten 1928. Det har ett transnationellt nätverk med avdelningar över hela Mellanöstern, i Libanon, Jordanien och Egypten. I sin order sa Trump att det muslimska brödraskapet ägnar sig åt och stödjer våld som skadar amerikanska medborgare och amerikanska intressen. Gruppen har samarbetat med terrorgrupperna Hamas och Hezbollah efter attackerna mot Israel den 7 oktober. Trump sa att sådana aktiviteter hotar amerikaner såväl som USAs partner i regionen. Presidenten har bett utrikesministern och finansministern att inleda processen för att formellt stämpla dem som terrororganisationer. Åtgärden kommer att innebära sanktioner mot den islamistiska gruppen.
President Trump hosting his 9th cabinet meeting of his second term amid questions about a deadly strike against a drug-carrying boat from Venezuela. The War Secretary defending the Pentagon strikes in the Caribbean and saying they've only just begun. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Tzu at the North Lawn of the White House. Mari, good evening.
Tiff, good evening. Yes, President Trump's last cabinet meeting today came amid scrutiny over a boat strike that happened in the Caribbean Sea exactly 3 months ago today. On September 2nd, the Pentagon struck a boat in the Caribbean, leaving 2 men alive, and then they ordered a second strike, which then killed both of those men. Some lawmakers have said that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth committed a war crime by ordering that second strike. But Hegseth, however, denies that. He denies ordering the strike, saying that he wasn't there and that it was rather Admiral Frank Bradley who had ordered it. Hegseth also defends Bradley for that choice, adding that the Pentagon will, quote, always have the backs of its commanders. Take a look.
I have empowered them to make that call. Now, the first couple of strikes, as you would, as any leader would want, you want to own that responsibility. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do, and by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand. You sit in your air-conditioned offices or up on Capitol Hill and you nitpick and you plant fake stories in the Washington Post about kill everybody, phrases on anonymous sources not based in anything, not based in any truth at all.
President Trump also doubles down on the effectiveness of these boat strikes, saying that they save hundreds of thousands of American lives. He also vows that land strikes on cartels are about to begin, quote, very soon, and that those land strikes wouldn't just be limited to Venezuela, but rather any country that's bringing illicit drugs into the U.S. And War Secretary Pete Hegseth says that the Pentagon's strikes have only just begun. Watch.
As I've said, and I'll say again, we've only just begun striking narco boats and putting narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean because they've been poisoning the American people. We're defeating narco terrorists and we're standing...
And you may say one thing, that drugs coming in through the sea by sea are down 91%. And I don't know who the 9% is.
I'm not sure either, sir.
But down 91% by sea.
We've had a bit of a pause because it's hard to find boats to strike right now. Which is the entire point, right? Deterrence has to matter, not arrest and hand over and then do it again, the rinse and repeat approach of previous administrations.
This comes as the U.S. has increased pressure on Venezuela with a U.S. military buildup in Venezuela. And as President Trump confirms that he spoke with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro over the phone on the weekend, although he did not say what exactly they discussed. And last week, the administration also formally designated Maduro and allies of his government as members of a foreign terrorist organization. Tiff.
Trump administration has officially designated the Cartel of the Suns as a foreign terrorist organization. The designation increases pressure on the Venezuelan regime of Nicolas Maduro. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Martinez, has more on the story.
The Cartel of the Suns takes its name from the sun insignia that Venezuelan generals carry on their uniforms. According to the U.S. government, the cartel was formed by top Venezuelan officials and is led by Nicolás Maduro. The U.S. government now considers members of the Venezuelan regime to be members of a foreign terrorist organization.
Well, it brings a whole bunch of new options to the United States. And he is indicted and wanted for he's not a legitimately elected leader of Venezuela. Everybody knows that. To give options to the president to ultimately say our hemisphere will not be controlled by narco terrorists. It will not be controlled by cartels. It will not be controlled by what illegitimate regimes try to push toward the American people.
The designation comes as the U.S. has the largest military buildup in the region since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s. And as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, is meeting with military commanders in Puerto Rico. The Venezuelan regime has mobilized its military and militias in response to the U.S. military buildup. and has become increasingly paranoid and accusing the US of sabotaging oil infrastructure in the country.
¿Qué pasa porque cada quien defienda? Because each person must defend their space, the oil and gas facilities, defend them from the CIA. The CIA who have slipped them a bill and said, go over there and damage the Venezuelan economy. That's the CIA's plan.
Congressional Republicans have backed the president's orders to strike narco-terrorists in the region. Over 80,000 Americans died last year due to illegal drugs.
If an invasion does take place down in Venezuela against Maduro, that would trigger a War Powers Act response by Congress. We would have 60 days, if the conflict is still ongoing, to determine whether a declaration of war is warranted or an authorized use of military force.
At least 7 major airlines have suspended flights to and from Venezuela over the weekend after the FAA warned of heightened military activity in and around Venezuelan airspace. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, Ntd News.
ICE deportations have hit a record pace. The reported number of illegal immigrants in custody has increased by 62% since January. And the Department of Homeland Security says they're working fast to deport them. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is reporting a record 65,000 illegal immigrants in custody as of November 15th. This is up from about 40,000 in January. The Department of Homeland Security commenting that under the leadership of Secretary Noam, DHS is working rapidly to remove these aliens from detention centers to their final destination. The current pace represents roughly 1,200 deportations a day since October 1st, as reported by the Washington Times. If this pace were kept up for 12 months, it would yield over 450,000 deportations. Some media reports have claimed that less than half of the illegal immigrants detained have a criminal record. However, the DHS maintains that 70% of the detainees have committed crimes. Earlier this month, White House border czar Tom Homan said that the remaining 30% are mostly national security threats.
Most national security threats don't have a criminal history. We arrested several thousand Iraqi nationals. Most of them don't have a criminal history. Why is that? Because they're laying low to do whatever they want to do. A lot of them are gang members. A lot of gang members don't have criminal history.
On Sunday, the DHS reported that a few days after they started their immigration enforcement operation in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 20% of students in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District stopped showing up for class.
1 in 5 seats suddenly became empty. It should concern every American that in a major city, hundreds of miles from the southern border, a large share of those seats that should belong to American children are occupied by children of illegal immigrants.
School officials did not offer an explanation for the increase in absences and told parents that students were expected to attend class as normal. The DHS has continued its aggressive campaign to hire more personnel, especially for ICE. Border Patrol recently opened up some term appointment roles for retirees if they wish to return, offering them double pay. Jason Blair, Ntd News.
För att se hela serien av hur kommunismens spöke styr världen samt andra serier och nyheter, gå in på ntdtv.se.